The application of neuroscientific techniques in the field of marketing have given rise to what is now a neuromarketing, a technique that facilitates the identification of brain centers activity by presence of stimulus received through the sense organs, and whose neurocognitive response is feasible. To measure the rewards mechanisms that activate that brain regions related to make decision and their respective balance, with in addition to relating and identifying them, helps to predict the behavior of the consumer when buying preferred to make decision. Braidot in 1912 said uh, the human brain, the brain is the most important organ to make decision in all things. For example, in the make decision to consumer, for example. Neuromarketing is an emergent knowledge derives technology from clinical neurosciences, from which a mind stimulation, neuropsychological response, and stimulus, neurocognitive, that the human being is very complicated. The human being is an animal of high complexity because it combines and articulate wide different elements. At first, existential beings create a sense of transcendence that impels you to leave a mark on your environment, which can be reflected in your heritage to your children, society, friends, or family, while generating ideas of immortality, true or not according to each person, for example, okay? Who promote the creation and in the implementation of values. The human being is social too. For its gregarious reason and specific cultural events, a grouping is generated that develops an intricate network of intrapersonal relationships to produce a complex society which, although its present partners of social condition, doesn't leave free election aside, is adaptive. The human being is psychological too. There is an emotional interaction when we're but drives on representation, conditioning, and self-realization. Fear and pleasure that combine mark temperamental aspect, for example, character and personality. At last, the human being is biological too. The neuroanatomical and neurophysiological substrate enable the development of social, psychological, and cultural elements, and in some way also determines them. It is worth mentioning that the human being is a combination of the previous aspect, where none predominates, they are interviewed with a synergy that has archived an adaptation as a species, which today places it ahead of the evolutionary claim. Neuroscience study the structure and chemical function, pharmacy and pathology of the nervous system, and how different elements of the nervous system interacted and give rise to behavior. Cognitive neurosciences study the combination of neurosciences and psychology propose a way of studying the brain and voluntary and involuntary action supported by biology, neurology, psychology, and neuropsychology. For example, the cognition is the most accepted definition of cognition is the ability of living beings to process information from perception, stimuli that come from outside worlds through the senses. Knowledges are key through experiences and our subjective characteristic that allow us to integrate information to value and interpret the world. The word cognition comes from the Latin cognoscere, which means to know. Therefore, when we talk about the cognitive, we are usually referring to everything that belongs or related to knowledge. That is the accumulation of information that we have occurred thanks to learning or to experiences. Cognition is the ability we have to assimilate it and process the data that comes to us from different ways, perception, experiences, belief, or many things more. To turn them into technologies, cognition encompasses different cognitive processes such as learning, attention, memory, languages, reasoning, decision make decision, etc. That are part of intellectual development and experiences. Different disciplines have addresses to study of cognition: neurology, psychology, anthropology, philosophy, and even to information senses. But it was cognitive psychology to begin to study how information processing influences behavior and the different mental processes related to the acquisition of the knowledges. Cognitive psychology emerged at the end of the 15th years as contrast to the prevailing behaviors of the times. Many authors, for example, Piaget or Vygotsky or Damasio, for example, many authors write about this. The cognitive process can be understood as the procedures we wish to incorporate new knowledges and make decisions about this. In this process, several cognitive functions intervene the perception, attention, memory, reasoning, for example. The human mind can be understood as the very complex computer, an intelligent machine. The theory of information processing is a set of psychological models that conceive the human being as an activity processor of the stimuli, information for inputs, that be obtained from the environment. This view is the opposite to the passive conception of people that characterizes other orientation, such as behavior and psychoanalysis. These models are included in cognitivism, a paradigm that defends that drugs and other mental contexts influence behavior and must be distinct from it. They became popular in 1915 as reaction to the behavior sentences prevalent at the time, which conceived the mental process is a form of behavior. The investigation and theoretical model developed within the framework of this perspective have been applied to a large numbers of mental processes. Particular emphasis should be placed on cognitive development. From the technique of information process, but brain structures themselves and their relation to maturation and socialization are analysis. The theorists of this orientation defend a fundamentally progressive conception of cognitive development, which is as opposite to state-based cognitive evolutionary models, such as that Jean Piaget, for example, focus on the quality change to appear as a children grow. Okay, neurotransmitter and synapses A neurotransmitter is a neuromediator of second messenger as a biomolecule that allows neurotransmitter that is the transmission of information from a neuron cell type to the nervous system to another neuron, a muscle cell or a gland, throughout the synapses to separate them. The neurotransmitter is released from the synaptic vesicle at the end of the presynaptic neuron towards the synapses throughout the synaptic space and act to specific cell receptor of the target cell. Neurotransmitter can be grouped into the neurotransmitter themselves and transmodulator. The latter are substances that act in the similar way to transmitter. The difference is they are not limited to the synaptic space, but rather they are diffused by extraneural fluid intervened directly in the postsynaptic phase of neurotransmission. Taking into account their chemical composition can be classified into cholinergic, acetylcholine, adrenergic, which are divided into the catecholamine, or for example, adrenaline, or epinephrine, norepinephrine, or norepinephrine and dopamine, serotonin, melatonin, and different. There's amino acid, for example, GABA, taurine, glycine, beta-alanine, glutamate, and aspartate, for example, peptides, free radicals, nitric oxide, carbon monoxide, anyway. How a neurotransmitter work? The neuron that releases to neurotransmitter is called the presynaptic neuron. The neuron that receives the signal is called the postsynaptic neuron, depend to the type the receptor postsynaptic neuron are stimulated or excited or discouraged, innervate. Each neuron communicates with many others at the same times. Okay, don't you know that? The origin of development of the concept of the neural work. The first investigation of the subject that roughly from the beginning of the 19th century, but I was not until to the decade of the 14th or 15th and the last century when it gained strength thanks to the connectionistic movement. This movement maintained the premise that the secret of the process of learning and technologies is fundamentally in axioms or unquestionable truth, and the technologies is independent of the structure that symbols handled. And the representation of knowledge is made from the most basic strand of intelligence. For example, the brain, especially in the neurons, and the multiple connection between them. This remarkable interest in neural networks was diminished in the 17th due to the emerging authors such as Minsky and Papert in 1969, who expressed the limitation of the learning process of neural network architectures. The central principle and connection is that mental phenomenon can be described by networks of simple and often equal units that interconnected. The neuron is the fundamental unit of the nervous system, you know, and in the particular in the brain. You can be happy, you can feel happy, because your brain has many structures to review the circuits. For example, the reward system is a set of mechanisms made by our brain that allow us the associated certain situation with a sense of pleasure. In this way, based on this lesson, we will then try to return to the situation that have generated these experiences in the future. In some way, the reward system is what allow us to locate objectives in a very primary senses. As human beings are exposed to varieties of situations for which biological evolution has not prepared us. These mechanisms reward certain action over others, making us learn on the fly what is good for us and what doesn't now. The reward system is closely linked to basic needs. It will make us feel very rewarded when we find a place that contains water when we have not drunk for too long. The reward circuit is everything that happens in our brains occurs very quickly and receives feedback from many other regions of the nervous system. They better understand how the reward system works. Its operation is often simplified by describing it as circuit with a principal and clear end. The mesolimbic pathway characterized among other things by the importance of neurotransmitter called dopamine in it. The principle of this chain of transmission of information is located in the area of the brain system called the ventral tegmental area. This region is related to the basic survival mechanisms that are automated with the lower part of the brain. And from there they go up to the limbic system, a set of structure now to be responsible for the generation of the emotion. The cingulate gyrus, also known is a neuroanatomy of cingulate gyrus. The cingulate gyrus is a convolution in the middle area of the brain that performs determined function in the brain activity of the limbic system. It's localized towards to edge or limbic the cerebral cortex. The most known characteristics are the beginning of the 1990, or this part is the brain are in the addition to the morphology already explained to be a name. It partly development the corpus callosum, cuerpo calloso, which is in the turn to nexus between the two cerebral hemispheres. Specifically, the cingulate gyrus is delimited by area called the marginal callus sulcus or cingulate sulcus. The lower part to cingulate gyrus role on itself. The cingulate gyrus receive afferent information inputs from the anterior nucleus and the thalamus, as well as the neocortex, and also connect with somatosensory areas of the cerebral cortex. These are projected towards to the entorhinal cortex throughout the cingulate cortex. Of course, the neurons is the most important cell for the brain. It's not the only cell, but is the protagonist for the transmitter, the information, the neurotransmitter, you know. And la synapsis is especially in the intercellular approximation between neurons, which between no two association neurons, a neurons and receptor cell, or between a neuron and effector cell. In this context, the nerve impulse transmission is carried out. This begins with a chemical approximation. This secret substance of neurotransmitter. That connection has the neuroplasticity. Synaptic neuroplasticity refers to the ability of the nervous system to change its structure and functioning throughout its life as a reaction to the diversity of the environment. Although this term is used today in psychology and neurosciences, is not easy to define. It is used to refer to the changes that occur at different levels into the nervous system. Molecular structure change in gene expression and behavior. Neuroplasticity allows a neuron to regenerate both anatomically and functionally and from new synaptic connection. Neuroplasticity represents the brain's ability to recover and restructure. This adaptive potential of the nervous system allows the brains to recover from disorder or injuries and can reduce the effect of structural alteration produced by pathology such as multiple sclerosis multiple, Parkinson, Alzheimer, and many diseases. Exist many researchers study about this case, about the connection, about the emotion, about the health, about the make decision. Not only in neuromarketing, for example, in psychoimmunomodulation, our brain can be produce anticuerpos, can be produce excitate the autoimmune system. For example, in this case, in the COVID-19, no affect the same kind to all the people. So many people affect is disease. Many people is only influence. No more is easy. What is the difference? Why some people died and some people don't die? Because the emotion is possible. I suppose, I think it's my hypothesis, the emotion can be produced, anticuerpos can be produced, stimulate the autoimmune system for the emotion. For example, Joseph Leduc in New York University work psychology of emotion, looking for an explanation of the emotion, says in the book The Emotional Brain, released in 1990, that my laboratory research he said, my laboratory research tries to understand the biological foundation of the empathy and the fear, in particular important emotion, to elucidate at the neural level sciences function. For example, Antonio Damasio is a pioneer of the study to the emotion from functional neurology with application especially in the education. Edwin Punset is now scientist, but is the most important to the founder, publicitator to the neurosciences topics in his program. The sensory windows. Okay, who function our brain in between emotion and health? Sensory windows act as doors for sensory stimuli. The oldest and used by humans is vision. However, the smell has the great effect of emotion because it is not mediated by the thalamus. The touch have receptor in this body's largest organ, the skin, for example, has more entry routes and its stimuli are the code in the somatosensory area located on the parietal lobe, whose the access is longer and therefore presents greater possibilities of leaving an mnemic footprint and therefore greater recall. Neuromarketing and relationship with health are closely related of the sexuality. Once the stimulus enters to the sensory windows, vision, hear, smell, touch, and taste, begin to impact different areas of the brain, including the reward centers, nucleus accumbens, ventral tegmental area, and emotional centers, amygdala, insula, basal ganglia, among others. These sensations are reflected in pleasure and displeasure that will impact the behavior of distance or approximation, but physical and emotional. These overt or covert behaviors could be fundamental in the health disease process. By the conclusion, thought is the result of neurochemical action. These mental processes are given by neuropsychological process. Consciously direct thoughts can inhibit or promote the production of neurotransmitters that in turn affect both moods and psychical health. Psychoimmunomodulation is understood as the result of brain chemistry secondary to the truth. Like all subjects relate to the brain emotion and their relationship with health, disease. This is still too much investigated and now, however, the future of the neurosciences offer encouraging vision for the human species. Thank you very much.